Alright, so Perez got back to me after my last one and wanted to short it. Well, here's an under 20-minute version. Also, I did commit publicly to doing a 90-second video about what's happening with me and Aiko, so that'll be coming. And that's going to be from Thanos to Dogpool. I've been asked to do a video. I'm raising concerns about the impartiality of Brian Friedman in relationship to his representation of Justin Baldoni. I'm going to watch some Perez Hilton.
He has tried to intervene and interject himself.
Interject, that's, you're already putting a context to it. Say interject is, it's, again, if you look at the filings, it's directly related to the Marvel filing, and to say that it's an interjection is an unfair characterization. I've been at this party well before Justin. I'm trying to get evidence for a case, and I've been for a long time. You can't say I'm kind of piggybacking when I was here first. He doesn't mention is that Aiko had Allison Lovelady, who was a lawyer tied to Time's Up, that reached out to Friedman about representing us to deal with Ryan, 2021. It means that we don't know how much Brian Friedman knows about us and how much he knew about us going into the case. So that means that you're actually misrepresenting the entire filing in that exact moment, because even with the Nicepool filing, there would have been the additional context of everything we went through from Mythic Quest, Free Guy, and everything to do with the aspects of indigenous erasure. And that's all part of the other filings. I got some baggage with Freeman, and that has nothing to do with Justin.
I don't want to misrepresent what he's saying.
I mean, you've already misrepresented what I'm saying. Like, right off the bat, 10 seconds in, you've already misrepresented what I'm saying, dude.
This Brett guy alleges that Ryan Reynolds stole or was heavily influenced by him. That is not relevant to these proceedings.
You don't think that it's relevant to the proceedings because you don't understand the full context of it. And that's something Cassidy O'Connell went through. Let me just read exactly what I said today, because this is what Perez doesn't understand. Basically, I'm alleging that Ryan Reynolds was involved in a coordinated PR campaign to suppress criticism of racism towards Indigenous people, including harm directed at my wife and me. In our view, the harm we experienced was not incidental, but part of the suppression effort. We believe that we were symbolically targeted in Free Guy, Mythic Quest, Deadpool and Wolverine, and even our dog was referenced in Deadpool, in the Dogpool character, as a form of retaliation after I spoke out. Deadpool and Wolverine also includes what we view as a racist digs, like the callback to The Proposal, a film that used exaggerated indigenous imagery for comedic effect. Taken together, these actions appear designed to humiliate us, protect Reynolds' reputation, reduce Hugh Jackman without facing criticism of Wolverine's race indigenous backstory, and generate revenue possibly to help fund Wrexham. So basically, we're saying that we went through the exact same thing, essentially, as what Justin is alleging, and the attack and the theft and the coordinated PR attacks. I'm basically saying me too. And it's bullshit that Friedman isn't actually using any of this in filings, and there's reasons for it, which I go into it. I don't think that's actually protecting Justin's interest, and I think that's where the bullshit comes in. And that's where I have a fucking problem with you, because you're a client of his. So when you say stuff like that, it comes across like you're covering up, because there's issues with Aiko and Time's Up, and other issues with Brian Friedman.
In my opinion.
Yeah, the question is whether it's in your opinion or whether it's in your lawyer's opinion. Okay, you're saying Brett could file his own lawsuit. Brett is trying to file his own lawsuit, but he wants to be successful with it. The motion 24, getting the discovery that is at risk of being destroyed or mischaracterized or sealed, makes my lawsuit better. Like, that's not a hard thing to get through your thick. I've already got a lot now because the Marvel subpoena, because they've made a tacit admission about Nicepool. But I mean, in my opinion, Brian kind of fumbled when he didn't use the Lohan case. The reality is he doesn't really have a strong case for the Nicepool issues unless it's in the larger context. The context would happen to Aiko and I. Say I'm inserting, no, there's complications, and this is exactly what you leave out, like Bo DeMaio, which is one of Brian's clients. You're one of Brian's clients, and it's tied towards annoying stuff. So the question I'm asking, is Brian selectively filtering things that he may have constructive knowledge of and damaging Justin Baldoni's case? Bo DeMaio was basically someone fired from Marvel. Brian Friedman is representing him. For Jubilee, he actually got an Asian actress. Didn't do the same for Wolverine. Didn't do the same for Forge. Wasn't sure to make sure the person was indigenous. For someone just coming in saying, I'm fixing racial harassment, it was only in the way that it didn't affect him. And that's exactly my point. Is there's kind of a network of people tied to Ryan, which I'm alleging, that have been trying to not get in trouble for being racist to indigenous people. So far, you've not mentioned one aspect of that. And that's why I think you're acting in bad faith, because you haven't mentioned that at all.
tried to hop onto this one. He's
See, that's again a negligent misrepresentation.
already gotten rejected by Judge Lyman.
I didn't get rejected by Judge Lineman. That was the first time. I then reset it because he gave me instructions the exact same way they gave instructions to Justin. Judge Lineman said the issue is no longer relevant because of Nicepool. What you are leaving out is that I then argued that there's potentially a conflict of interest with Judge Lineman because his brother worked with Aiko's ex, who was actually involved in the allegations. It created a conflict of interest. And I've also filed a motion to overturn what the judge said. The judge never just threw it out. They said, even based on the facts, they said it's possible to file. You don't mention that I was mentioned by Taylor Swift and that there's potentially conversations in there that I will probably not get access to.
But you were mentioned by Taylor Swift when he didn't have a standing.
I didn't have standing. A protected interest. Let's actually look at what he actually skipped ahead from. Delayed communication direct back to protected interest. So he skips through. You left out the entire Brian Friedman background, and this is what he skips. As background, I have received reports that Mr. Brian Friedman, counsel of record, and this was backed up by an exhibit, for defendant was contacted by Allison Lovelady. Allison Lovelady is an attorney. At the request of Aiko Shiwada, an attorney with ties to Time's Up, in relation to the concerns now raised before the court that predate Mr. Baldoni's involvement in the symbolic relation issues involving Dogpool and Nicepool, and that also involves prior matters related to Mr. Reynolds, Mr. McClenny, and their professional associates. This context underscores the relevance of institutional and narrative entanglement raised in my filings. My spouse, Aiko Shiwada, was among the signatories of the August 2021 open letter titled Enough is Enough, an open letter from survivors to Time's Up, which criticizes systemic failures by the organization, including those related to retaliation and exclusion. Here's a fun question, Perez. Why did you leave that out? And this is where he stops, and he skips through.
This is ridiculous.
And this is what he calls ridiculous, that there was actually a direct contact in advance. And this is where it kind of comes across as he's actually trying to manufacture the story. That is a misrepresentation of the filing right there.
And why would he have issue with Baldoni's attorney?
Why would I have issue with Baldoni's attorney? You skipped the section where there was an issue. The Cuomos are involved in the Time's Up scandal that Aiko's attached to. Mr. Friedman's high-profile representation of Chris Cuomo, whom he has publicly described as a trusted friend and mentor. Brian Friedman has a close relationship, according to Cuomo, with someone that Aiko has an entanglement with through Time's Up. Came out that one of the brothers was consulting with Time's Up on how to manage the governor's scandal, and it resulted basically in Time's Up being disbanded.
That letter was actually criticizing that.
When you're leaving out the Cuomo, why would I have issues with Brian Friedman being directly connected and having constructive knowledge about a lot of things that he had a duty of candor to the court about, and not having that duty of candor may have affected his client negatively?
Filed a second amended complaint does not have to be shared with you.
It's a bit more complicated when there was constructive knowledge. Creates a conflict because, again, you skipped over a couple things again too. Additionally, I wish to note the following. Mr. Friedman's simultaneous or recent representation of Bo DeMaio, who is tied to Marvel, and FKA Twigs, whose former relation with Robert Pattinson was in Twilight, which ties right to indigenous erasure, a known associate of Nick Frankel, who's central to the filings, creates a potential material overlap and perceived conflicts. This is an editorial choice, and this is where it becomes an issue of misrepresentation. That's a major conflict, and in my view, in the representation of Mr. Baldoni. Friedman public remarks criticize reporting as skewed or connected with the live litigation further reflect on narrative control strategies. So you're doing, in my opinion, exactly what I've accused you of in the filing. You're actually avoiding this and doing narrative control. And so Mr. Friedman's representation of Gabriel Union, Megan Kelly, and others in disputes concerning organizational backlash and systemic discrimination underscore a pattern that raises legitimate concern about institutional entanglement relevant to these proceedings. That's an important point that you left out. And so that's when it comes to the second amendment complaint. It means that potentially the filing or even the original filings, and this is my opinion, may have strategically left out information about us at the beginning because of the interests of some other clients and not necessarily in the interest of Justin Baldoni or a duty of candor to the court.
This is why I've not covered this guy before.
See, that's a negligent misrepresentation. You left that out and then went to it. And so when you say that, you're intentionally mischaracterizing the circumstance while ignoring the substantive aspects of the argument, which is the Time's Up connection. You didn't represent that to your viewers. That's not journalism. That's spin.
I'm only doing this now because I mentioned
I would dispute that. To say that you're only doing it because you're mentioned now, then why didn't you talk about Time's Up?
Selective representation and overlapping entanglements reinforces the urgent need to preserve my right to
That's exactly the point. What overlapping entanglements? You just read them. You read past them.
No, file your own lawsuit.
I intend to file my own lawsuit, but why would I waste good intelligence?
Nicepool is only very inconsequentially related to all of this mess.
Strongly disagree. I think that's actually one of the main issues is there's a modus operandi when it comes to signaling and reputational issues. And this is what Judge Lineman really did when he did the dismissal, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, but he gave a very specific path for Baldoni and Mr. Freeman, the Wayfarer parties, to reintroduce the issues with Nicepool in the larger context of how Mr. Reynolds does business. And I think that's directly relevant. But the reality is that it had other issues with other clients, and it meant having a larger conversation, in one particular with Indigenous rights.
And so much of what Brett is writing today is guessing and conjecture.
So you're making a very specific claim about guessing and conjecture, yet you left out the basic evidence that I relied upon for that. Here's what he decided to leave out. Every single time, what he skips is most telling. Let's go up one paragraph. For example, unsealed discovery requests filed as document 3261 on June 13th, 2025 include communications with the cast, crew, production, and costume teams composed of individuals such as Taylor Swift, who put me on a filing, Sean Levy, who did Free Guy and Deadpool and Wolverine, Bradley Cooper, and Peter Greenstein, as well as agencies including Vision PR and Sloan. And of course, communications that I've had. These categories directly overlap with my Rule 24 because my argument is the judge limited it simply to Nicepool when there's much more to it, and there's much more that would come up in discovery, in my opinion. Furthermore, the conspicuous absence of Hugh Jackman, despite his direct personal and professional relation with Mr. Reynolds, and the extensive symbolic overlap outlined in my filings raises further concern. Given Mr. Jackman's central role in the relevant media narratives, and the fact that I've actually had a lawsuit with him in Canada, and that he has full knowledge of everything that happened with ACO and I, and that's on public record. And so the fact that Perez leaves this out, it comes across that he's manufacturing a narrative, in my personal opinion, because everything he specifically leaves out has an objective which is related to my main thesis in the document. Given that he's tied to Mr. Brian Friedman, he's basically just proving my point with every single thing he says. Notably, while the Dogpool Nicepool narrative pairing, as substantiated in my prior filing, Sean Levy, referenced in the unsealed discovery, this document does not meaningfully address the symbolic targeting as central aspect of my filings. Basically, what I'm doing here is arguing that the limited framing based on the knowledge information that Mr. Friedman has is problematic. I don't know if it's actually in the best interest of the Wayfarer parties, and this is just my opinion. It brings the question of whether he's disclosed this to Mr. Baldoni in the past, whether he knew about this in advance, and how much he knew about this in advance, and whether this relates to the duty of candor to the court that is required of any attorney. By specifically leaving this stuff out, he's proving my point.
The delay of the not filing a second amended complaint, it's not a delay. They're not filing it. If this is in fact the reason for the failure to file...
And this I think he just doesn't understand. The possibility the filing wasn't done necessarily in bad faith, but that especially given the response, I have indications that there was bad faith potentially in the failure to file. And Perez is giving more evidence there's potential bad faith. And again, it is my view that this is not in the interest of justice. Basically, I'm saying is that it doesn't serve anybody to not have the full set of facts in it. If you're leaving stuff out that's important to the record, then you're not acting with duty of candor to the court.
But speculation and conjecture should remain out of the court.
It doesn't matter about the speculation. It means a protection of the rights relating to settlement so that they can't settle, or Ryan can't give an offer and settle this case without actually going through with wall in a way that would negatively affect my rights.
They think it's not relevant.
Bull. If you look at the complaint and you look at the aspect to it and the relationships to it, it's that there's major issues when it comes to Indigenous people, and there's larger suppression throughout media in relationship to it. And that's actually part of the strategy, and that's part of the allegations that I related earlier on. And so they're literally acting in tandem with the exact allegations I've raised. And so of course I would raise that allegation. And when you're doing it here, you've already demonstrated this because you didn't talk about the Indigenous aspect of it. You left everything out of that because you know how widespread it is and how big of issues it is when it comes to Twilight, Robert Patterson, everything. You know it's a major issue, and don't pretend that that's like there's no chilling effect with that.
A little footnote here adds, based on the available data, Perez Hilton's post on June 23rd, which I published literally right after the deadline passed, when it hit midnight on the East Coast.
But there's many people on X, and I watched, who did not publish an assertion and only questioned it. You went further with it and made assertions, and that's the basis of that.
So at 9 p.m. June 23rd, but midnight on the 24th, appears to be one of the first, if not the first, public reports linking Justin Baldoni's failure. I've been covering this saga intensely.
So why did you go first? But again, even the motion to recuse, you keep leaving out Indigenous Canadian actor. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the erasure I'm talking about, is that no one's talking about that aspect to it. And specifically the omissions you made in the video, including my indigeneity and how that relates to the existing conflict, it's pretty telling.
Personally, I don't think his allegations against Ryan Reynolds are relevant to the It Ends With Us.
I mean, you don't think that there's mixture of Justin Baldoni and Brett Douglas McDowell in Nicepool is relevant? I mean, that's kind of a very specific thing given the whole history of it and its ties to Wolverine and Marvel.
Arguments could definitely be made about Judge Lyman and if he should be recused.
But I'm not going to make an argument about Judge Lyman without being completely candid with Mr. Freeman. I am not going to mislead or omit to the courts.
What I said is problematic.
No, you left out Indigenous things. And the point is that you left out larger context, and then you just prove the context that you left out. And you've skipped over it specifically, intentionally editorial, and you think someone could ascertain potentially maybe a motive to that?
Crazier than crazy.
Again, we've actually covered this. There's actually a racism aspect to crazy because Lou Riello's Métis was called crazy and executed, and it's actually part of a racist term in Canada. And I've tagged you and covered this, so that's just the way people say things to kind of diminish Indigenous people. So yeah, it comes across racist to me.
Brett says, should any discovery reveal that reputational management strategies, including payments to influencers, PR consultants, or media intermediaries, were undertaken in ways that obscured, dismissed, or discredited symbolic concerns like those raised in my filings, this would further substantiate my interest in intervention.
I mean, yeah, you just skipped over a bunch of things intentionally, and now we have transparency for it. So, yeah, and this is not an attack on any of the participants, whether Blake or Baldoni. It's my concern with Brian Friedman, who doesn't have the best reputation. And I wonder if that's just the only lawyer he could get, like Baldoni could get in Hollywood, because otherwise, like, I'm not judging Baldoni for getting Friedman, but, like, he's not a popular man. I don't like Brian Friedman, and it's because I've had these connections with him, and he comes up a lot in Eat Predators. He comes up a lot in the Nickelodeon stuff.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm 99% sure that his intervention request is gonna get denied yet again.
Entirely possible, but in the context of linemen, it opens an avenue for appellate in relationship to it. And I would be remiss if I did not exercise every avenue to obtain discovery in relationship to this case. Let's look at what I said about Brittany that you left out. And this is what you left out, and this is why you're full of. This pattern is not without precedent. During Britney Spears' conservatorship crisis, Mr. Friedman simultaneously represented individuals in proximity to her management, including Larry Rudolph, her manager at the time, while also representing media figures like Miss Hilton. And now you've actually just covered for Brian Friedman. And at the past, you've been engaged, and you've admitted to this, of your issues with Britney and a lot of other women, and the harassment of those women, allegedly, while also representing figures like Miss Hilton. The reality is that coverage significantly contributed to the reputational harm. In fact, this is highlighted on Mr. Friedman's firm's website. Mr. Friedman talks about representing you for years, and this overlap relationship scores the appearance of reputational management and selective silence. In particular, public narratives implicate Mr. Friedman's client for this important argument for Intervention Rule 24, and that's exactly what you left out, is that you acted exactly like I said you would act. And you completely proved my point. You were represented by Ryan Friedman when you went after Britney. And it begs the question of if there's a secondary objective to Mr. Friedman's actions that may potentially undermine his ability to represent Mr. Baldoni. And so you took a fair criticism in the interest of justice, and you left out very specific things. You left out Hugh Jackman, you left out Britney Spears, you left out every major name, and that's not by accident. Why did you skip those? That was an editorial decision.
It's just so crazy. He's also trying to play.
That is slander. That is libel. You left specific things out. You call me crazy, and you say it's crazy.
Both sides. Boo him, boo him. So crazy. Just,
That's defamation, especially in Canada. And I will see you in Canada.